Rick, would you like to do this? Perfect. Let me know, Amos, when you're ready. You good? Council ready? Good afternoon, everyone. We'll call to order this special meeting of the Willow City Council for Wednesday, June 26, 2024. Item 2 on our agenda, Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Thomas, would you do the honors? Lead us in the pledge, please. Thank you.
Stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rick. Item 3, roll call. City Clerk Amos Hoover, please.
Councilmember Thomas,
Here.
Councilmember Sprague,
Here.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Here.
Vice Mayor Hudson,
Here.
Mayor Hanson.
Here.
Mayor's present, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Item 4, public comment. Individuals wishing to address the city council concerning the budget workshop are invited to make oral comments of up to 3 minutes at this time. Please address your comments to the mayor and council members and not to staff and or the audience. And by state law, as a reminder, the council is not permitted to undertake any action or discussion on any item not appearing on the posted agenda. Are there any public comments in reference to our budget matter today? Hello, Mr. Gupton. Yes,
Dan Gupton,
thank you.
to the council. One thing I think we're fortunate to have, and that's people that really put their stuff into grants. And of course, we have the chief who does a great job. But I also at times, and I think it's sometimes not realized, that our own library director does the same thing also. And we're really lucky to have that. In this past year, she's accumulated $112,739 in grants, and none of them are matching. Every one of them is a grant and is being used to expand. And so as we are with the chief, I think it's something that we need to be thankful that we have two people that really look and try and stretch every penny they can stretch, whether it be by grants or whatever else. So I just wanted to remind, I'm sure you guys were aware of that, but I just wanted to make it public. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Gupton. Are there any other public comments on the 24-25 budget today? Any public comments? No more? Okay, thank you. Item 5, fiscal year 2024-2025 budget approval. Consider, discuss, make amendments as needed, and approve the fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed budget. Our presenter today is Andy Heath, our financial consultant, and Marty Brown, our city manager. Marty?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. Just very briefly, as noted at the May 29th budget workshop, I call this a sacrifice budget. There really are no new items in it. It is a status quo budget. The only real project that we have that's hitting the general fund is a continuation of the municipal code update. Beyond that, all the other projects pretty much that we're working on in the city hit other funds, including the sewage fund and our gas tax fund, SB1 funds for roads, the sewage system. So it really is kind of a status quo budget this year. And we are looking forward to November and seeing how the remainder of the fiscal year turns out. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andy to walk you through the minor adjustments that we've made since the May 29th workshop. Andy.
Thank you, Marty.
Great. Thank you, Marty. Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For the record, Andy Heath, city's financial consultant. As the city manager mentioned, what we'll be doing today is just going through the final budget that's being presented for fiscal 24-25, which starts basically in 4 or 5 days from now. What I'm going to do, a lot of the information that you're going to see tonight and hear tonight today is a repeat of what you heard last month. So I'll try to get through that fairly quickly and focus on the new stuff, the new information that's in this report, and give you the highlights of what might have changed since you saw this on May 29th. As part of that, I'll be going through the budget development process to date. We'll look at the 24-25 citywide proposed budget as a whole, and the total citywide appropriation authority that we're asking for. General fund revenues and expenditures and the forecasts have been updated, consistent with some changes that have been made. We'll go through what those are. We'll look at the city sewer fund, and spend a little bit of time on that. We'll look at other fund groups and special revenue fund updates. And then at that point in time, we'll answer any questions and consider adoption of the 24-25 budget. Next slide, please. Budget process to date so far. So just once again, we have updated the fiscal information consistent with the fiscal 22-23 audit process. The audit has been completed. Your council has received the audit report that has come before the council previously when the auditors made that presentation. We also did a review and update of the fiscal 23-24 financial activity, where we looked at the mid-year report and the budget development overview in January. Kind of early to do a mid-year, but we did it anyway, recognizing where the city was from a fiscal sustainability perspective. We wanted to put information before you quickly so that we could get direction and move forward prudently from a fiscal perspective. Work with management and staff to update the budget for 23-24, and more importantly, incorporating anything in for 24-25 that might be required. We looked at city council requests into the budget and put those in there. Updated the general fund based budget forecast. So this is as I point out every time, this is a very fluid document. Okay, the forecast changes from day to day. And it has even changed since May 29th. So you'll see what that looks like today. Presentation of the fiscal 24-25 preliminary budget came before you on May 29th, about a month ago. And then today we're doing the budget one last time to hopefully get it adopted and move forward. Next slide, please. So this is your citywide budget, kind of a snapshot. And what this does is it rolls up all the types of funds that are in the budget itself. You have the general fund, which is the city's essentially largest fund and pays for most of the things that the city undertakes. The enterprise fund is basically now only the sewer fund moving forward. The water fund is being closed in fiscal 24-25. And the special revenue funds are basically all the other funds in the city that are used to operate and pay for things that the city incurs. The appropriation authority that we're asking for is your citywide budget, which is $15.49 million. Okay, that is the spending authority that we're looking for. Approval tonight to move forward, and you can see how that is parsed out in the various fund groups. One thing I do want to point out is that this budget has changed a little bit on the general fund side, where now the amount of general fund reserves that will be required to balance this budget. And keep in mind, this is only a budget. This is what we think hypothetically might happen given a huge array of assumptions that are built in for next year. But assuming all of those assumptions come to fruition, we anticipate using just over $620,000 of general fund reserves to balance the budget for fiscal 24-25. For the current fiscal year, we anticipate using just over $757,000 in general fund reserves, $757,000. So you can see when you're using reserves from year to year, there's a systemic issue. And your council is very well aware of the systemic issue that exists. And this is what we're trying to combat as we bring back the fiscal information to your council on an ongoing basis. Next slide, please. This is the capital outlay. When you look at the citywide budget, so I just wanted to point out in the aggregate, there is about $6.3 million in capital projects that are budgeted in the various funds in the city. You can see the general fund has about $65,000 in capital, where we have upgrade computer equipment, Tyler license basically, fire equipment, the base for that $10,000, and the base for computer equipment $5,000. What that base means is that is just an amount that is put into the budget on an ongoing basis and assumed to be ongoing in future years when you look at your forecast, specifically for fire, recognizing there is just an amount of apparatus needs or equipment needs that is needed on an ongoing basis every year. So there's $10,000 built into the base level for that without any specificity on how it's to be spent, but just recognizing that the fire chief will need equipment, and similarly computer. So the computer base is $5,000, which isn't a whole lot, but to the extent someone needed a new computer or something of that nature from an informational technology perspective, the city would have $5,000 built into the budget. Now, if those monies aren't spent, They just drop the fund balance and they're rebudgeted in the next year. Sewer fund, we've talked about this, a lot of the sewer fund projects that make up the just over $3 million in capital projects there are for, we're going to use the bond money that was secured 2.5 years ago for most of these projects. So it's good to see that that money is to be spent. You can only use this bond money, which the city doesn't even have in its coffers. It's actually in a trustee account that's being held in the name of the city. This money can only be used for projects. So hopefully we start that in the coming year and we move forward. Transportation just consists of very minimal street maintenance, street reconstruction, and sidewalk maintenance. You can see that we still have the master fee schedule that we're using the remaining ARPA funds for. And then a new big one that's actually been added, which is a new fund that's added to the budget this year, is an overarching, what I'm calling the Parks Grant Fund. Okay, and there's a lot that's going to go into this. And as these things start to come back to the city council and actually get considered, we'll delineate what those specific items are. But right now there are plenty, and they're rolled up into one fund, one revenue line item, and one, it's actually multiple revenue line items, and one expenditure line item. But this Park Grants Fund will go to take a couple of grants actually that were received related to the Sycamore Park. I think there's a Proposition 68 grant and another Clean California grant maybe that's being used for that. And then also the swimming pool is also in this fund as well. So the upgrades to the swimming pool that we've been talking about for a couple of years are actually appropriated and built into the budget for the coming year. Next slide. These are the FTEs or the full-time equivalent positions that are actually built into the budget for the city. You have 23 FTE, which does include the 5 council members. So when you take those positions out, there's 18 that remain. One maintenance worker in the Public Works Department is frozen. That position is currently vacant and has, for the purposes of fiscal 24-25, and the authority we're asking for, it has been defunded. So there is no funding included in this budget for that one maintenance worker position. This budget does assume, however, that all of the other positions are filled for the entirety of the year. Most of those positions are now filled. We talked about the frozen positions. So the recreation supervisor was defunded at mid-year last year. And then again, I'm adding the maintenance worker, which is a full-time position. You have part-time folks that are still built into the budget for the use of part-time staff in the library, recreation and swimming programs, obviously. And then your firefighters have a couple of them as well. And then the allocation of staffing to the sewer fund is to be variably costed, not by a percentage, but it is appropriated at 25% for the Public Works Department. So when you take the entire budget for the 6 individuals now that remain in the Public Works Department instead of the 7, keeping in mind one of them is defunded, take that whole budget, multiply it by 25%, okay, and that amount is what's budgetarily, and we're going to go through this in just a little bit when I talk about the sewer fund, but that amount is what's budgetarily allocated from a budget perspective only, okay, budget perspective only, allocated to the sewer fund instead of the general fund. The point I want to make here with this slide is that just because it's budgeted doesn't mean it's actually going to happen, okay, because what we're going to do is at the end of each year, we're going to look at exactly what has transpired consistent with time cards, consistent with time tracking, time allocation, just like we did last year when we did the 22-23 information. And we're only going to allocate time that is specific to the sewer fund that's noted by person, by month in the sewer fund to that. So if we're assuming that we're going to transfer from Public Works $100,000, that may only be $60,000. However, on the contrary, it may be $120,000 if that's what comes back. Nonetheless, at the end of the day, all of that will be trued up and it will come back to you and you'll see exactly what that is. So I'm going to stop on that right now. We're going to pick that back up when I talk about the sewer fund now. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, So assuming that full budget, that appropriation authority that we're asking for comes to fruition, and we bring in the revenues that we're estimating to bring in fiscal 24-25, this is what your reserves will look like at the end of the day. So on June 30th, a year from now, 2025, you'll have remaining in the general fund just about $597,000 in reserves, dangerously low. Okay, you can't sustain another year in the general fund past this year without making some changes. In the sewer fund, you'll have 2.4 million, 2.5 million. A lot of that is designated. About $1 million will remain in the bond money that is to be used for a specific purpose. And you can see your transportation funds have just over $1 million in them. So that's good. That means you can undertake certain capital projects in your transportation funds or do things related to your streets that may not be appropriated right now. However, they may be outlined in your CIP in future years. So you do have funding that's available there. You have an array of other library funds, and I'll go through those very briefly in a couple of slides. About 26,000 remains there. And then you can see you have a variety of other funds. You also have $900,000 remaining in your impact fee funds. Most of that is for the I-5 interchange impact fee. I want to say about half of that, 900,000 is related to that fund. But you have an array of other funds, and I do have a slide on impact fees as well that I'll go through with you. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we do plan on spending all of the remaining ARPA funding that the city has received last year and the year before by the end of next fiscal year, which you need to have that all appropriated by December, this coming December, and then you have to have spent it by 2 years from December. So it looks like your city will be successful in doing that. Next slide. Okay, focusing real quickly on the general fund. So this kind of just shows you what the estimated actuals for the current year are going to be, about 6.1 million in revenue, 6.8 million in expenditures, where we anticipate using just over $750,000 in fund balance. This is somewhat improved from the mid-year, where we anticipated at mid-year that we were going to use 816,000. So got a little bit better. And what that amounts to is a lowering of some of the revenues consistent with activity, particularly sales tax and TOT. That was built into the final numbers for 23-24 that we're anticipating. And then I also built in, consistent with information received from the city manager and the city attorney's office, the use of impact fees, certain impact fees, particularly streets and stormwater impact fees, to pay for the debt service in 23-24 related to the city's GAP loan. So that has been built in as well. For fiscal 24-25, proposed budget anticipates a use of reserves of 620,000. As I mentioned previously, 5.8 million in revenue, offset by 6.4 million in expenditures. Again, all positions are funded for the entirety of the year, sans the 2 positions that I covered. Revenues are adjusted to account for expected activity in the coming year, and they are conservatively placed. So we're not getting ahead of ourselves in estimating that property taxes are going to grow 6 or 7%. Okay, we're going to wait and see what transpires. And because of the fiscal situation that the city is in, one of the things we will also be doing is bringing back more frequent reporting to you on where the general fund particularly sits as the year goes on. Police grant contract, $2 million is built into the budget for that for fiscal 24-25. We have another year of the CAL FIRE grant. And the important thing about the CAL FIRE grant is that's a $210,000 grant, a lot of which is used to supplant existing service levels in the general fund. So if you didn't have this grant, it would not be good. Okay, so in the future, you can see that grant drops off in the forecast, and you still have to provide those services. So some of those services that it covers are like overtime, weed abatement costs, and other things that the fire department undertakes usually and all the time. ARPA funding is exhausted. I mentioned that. And I want to say we used just over $260,000 of remaining funds for as a police contract offset. So that's where that is being recommended. And then the use of impact fees to offset the annual gap loan is again built into fiscal 24-25. Okay, and ironically, the amount of funding that was available in the stormwater and streets development impact fee funds equaled the amount of the debt service. It was really, really close. So that's a good thing. Next slide, please. Some of the changes and additions to the city's general fund. So these are what we're anticipating. So discretionary revenue sources represents these three things: property tax, sales tax, and transient occupancy tax. This is where 81%, almost 82% of all your general fund revenue comes from. Okay, so this is your bread and butter, basically. So we're anticipating property taxes to grow by 2%. More than likely, they will grow by a little bit more than that. And probably within the next month or 2 months, we'll know what that number is. So when we find out what that is, we'll bring that back and we'll adjust the budget accordingly. Sales taxes are adjusted to reflect current forecast recommendations. We work with HDL to look at what they're forecasting. And then we do our own forecasting as well, where we're looking at what we think actually might transpire. And those two forecasts are very, very close to each other, but they have been adjusted. And similarly, transient occupancy taxes have been adjusted to account for current activity. So we know how much we receive every quarter from the city's 6 or 7 hotels. And we just parlay that out, look at what happened previously, but we also look at trending analysis on what has happened recently to see whether or not it makes sense to keep current activity static or raise or lower it. All other general fund revenues are held static or increase or decrease based on current year or prior year experience. So these would be things like development fees that come in, planning fees, building permits, those sorts of things, and any other franchise fees and such. So we do a little bit of analysis on those and forecast those. And then in the revenue side and the expenditure side for that matter, if there's any one-time funding in the previous year that drops off, we take that out. So obviously moving forward in the forecast, we want that forecast to only be representative of what it's going to be ongoing revenues offset by ongoing expenditures. And that's how you determine the sustainability of the city. Next slide. This is what the forecast looks like. So you can see in 22-23 used about 415,000 in fund balance. This year, estimating just over $750,000, another 757. Next year, 620. And then you can see, starting in 25-26, a lot of one-time stuff drops off. Okay, so you have the ARPA money that's no longer able to infuse the general fund and offset expenditures. You have grants that are no longer going to be, well, at this point in time, they're not scheduled to be collected in fiscal 25-26 like they are next year. You have a police contract that is going up. Well, actually, go to the next slide. Here's the causes. Okay, so the revenue growth not keeping pace with expenditure growth. You have inflationary pressures that are built into a lot of line items. The everyday cost of doing business for certain things like energy, PG&E, insurance. I mean, these are things that the city has to have, and they just keep going up and up. Police services contract, that goes up. I want to say that goes up by about $350,000 in the budget for the next year in 25-26. CalPERS UAL cost return. So we're now re-amortizing a new UAL unfunded liability from CalPERS. And that's built into both the general fund and a portion of that, about 9%, is attributable to the sewer fund. Removal of one-time revenue sources, including ARPA and fire and public works grants. The costs for staffing are all built in. Keep in mind that 100% of the staff that is authorized as being recommended in next year's 24-25 budget is parlayed all the way out through all the forecasted years. And then it's going to be really important to watch those unforeseen costs that come up. And we went over that with the last budget, where there's just things that come up that you ultimately have to pay for that that you need. So next slide. This is what the forecast looks like from a fund balance perspective. So you can see at the end of this year, just under 600,000 in fund balance will remain, assuming in the next year, assuming we bring in all the revenue we're anticipating next year in the general fund and then spend all the money we're anticipating to be spent. That money ultimately will run out sometime in fiscal 25, 26, probably around December 25, January 26, to the extent nothing is done and everything remains static. And like we say, every time we come back, that's not practical. That's not something that we will continue to recommend that the council do. And as time goes on, we will do whatever we can to recommend to the council how we can mitigate future use of reserves and create a sustainable path for the future. Next slide. These are the pension obligation, well, these are your pension costs, basically. So the blue bar represents normal costs, which is the cost for existing employees that the city pays a percentage of payroll for. The orange bar represents the unfunded liability. And you can see back in 1920 and 2021, we had a big component of unfunded liability. That's what your city bonded for. And you took that unfunded liability, which was only projected to keep growing because CalPERS was not meeting their investment objectives, and you bonded for it and fixed the rate that you're paying in the future. That's why in 21, 22, it went way down to just a little sliver of an orange bar, and it disappeared in 22, 23, and 23, 24. All right. In 24, 25, next year, you see it's coming back. And this is just simple. Even though you bonded a couple of years ago, CalPERS in the last couple of years has not made their discount rate. They have not made the 7%, 6.9%, or the 6.8% that they're supposed to make to keep constant, all things constant in their actuarial reports. That is why the city now has an unfunded liability again in 24, 25. And you can see within their actuarial reports, which will be updated either next month or in August, those numbers keep growing. So that orange bar gets bigger. The yellow bar is not growing. The yellow bar is a fixed cost for the most part. And the blue bar, to the extent there's no salary growth in the city, will not change either. But in 24, 25, we anticipate spending a total of $780,000 in the general fund for CalPERS costs. And that's going to grow by about $65,000 to $845,000 in 27, 28. So not a whole lot, but an increase nonetheless. Next slide. Sewer Enterprise Fund. So let's talk about this. So Sewer Enterprise Fund, fiscal 24, 25 proposed budget, about $2.1 million in revenue, just under $4.9 million in expenditures are being asked for appropriations. Projected sewer fund balance, assuming all of that comes to fruition, will be about $2.4 million, $1 million of which is restricted for purposes like the bond money that remains and then any debt service reserves that are required. You do have a programmed rate increase for sewer, consistent with the rate study. Sewer fund has an operating margin. So when you look at the cost of operations on an ongoing basis and you subtract those from the ongoing revenues that are received, it's about $276,000. So this 276 represents the amount that the sewer fund can put back into capital every year for things that on an ongoing basis. So that's always important because, as you know, the sewer fund has certain permit requirements that need to be met that are updated frequently by the state. And you have to have capital money set aside to be able to do that. So you have that. This sewer fund budget does include $255,000, $357,000 for overhead, administration, and public works staff costs. Okay. And again, I'm going to reiterate to the city council that only actual costs will be transferred. Just because the budget says it's 255 doesn't mean it's going to be 255. In fact, I can guarantee you it won't be 255. It will be something different than 255. It could be more, it could be less. But it will only happen. We will only know what these costs are in finality at the end of the year when all of the costs have been incurred and we can do that transfer. which is what we did last year. If you go to the next slide. So this is a slide that I added to the presentation. And you can see here what those costs, what that $255,000 is made up of. Those costs include, and all of these costs are justifiable. They are practical. They are necessary because the sewer fund is, although it's an enterprise of the city, it's part of the city. Okay. Your city manager manages the sewer fund. It's as simple as that. Your city manager has overarching oversight over the city's sewer fund. Similarly, the community development director participates in management of that fund. The accounting manager, by doing the audit, by doing all of the accounting, by making the payroll, by using the city's financial system, by doing whatever needs to be done for the sewer program from an accounting perspective, your accounting manager is participating in that. Financial analyst, similar, same thing. City clerk, anything that comes before this body that's related to the sewer, including this budget, that has any nexus to anything being discussed about the sewer, the city clerk participates in as well. You also have a financial consultant, me, that spends a lot of time on your sewer fund and actually goes through and looks at the sewer fund and looks at certain things that are being requested related to the sewer fund. Your audit audits the sewer fund. Okay, the sewer fund is a big component of the audit. City hall utilities and building maintenance, your sewer, all the operations that are conducted by your city manager, your city clerk, your finance staff, and your community development director, well, they're housed in city hall. So it does make sense that there's an indirect component that is charged for the utilities that are needed for those individuals to operate in city hall that's charged back to a sewer fund. Legal costs, none of your legal retainer is charged to the sewer fund previously, okay? And that doesn't make any sense, okay? Your city attorney is your city attorney, not a general fund attorney, not a gas tax fund attorney. It's your city attorney, and your enterprise for the sewer fund is part of the city. Information technology, same thing. All of the city's technological assets that are used to conduct business on an ongoing basis, including financial system, including any spreadsheets, including putting together agenda reports, et cetera. All of that plays a part with the sewer fund. And then, of course, your titer license, which is your financial system itself, that should be charged. So you can see the percentages that are being assumed, okay? And this is where it can get arbitrary, all right? So we had a conversation about this a while ago and sat down and we said, okay, you know, how much time, what does make sense to charge in terms of percentages for these individuals which have a clear nexus to the management of the sewer fund? What makes sense? So you can see they range from anywhere 7% to 15%, okay, which is not out of the norm. And then you can see for some of the other costs, 10%, 15%, 15%, 10%, 10%, 10%. Okay. If you looked at the total activity in the sewer fund versus the total activity in all other funds of the city, sewer fund's got a lot. Okay, we're spending millions of dollars potentially on all the capital projects and everything in the sewer fund. So when you look at total expenditures, does it make sense to allocate these costs based on total expenditures in the budget or something else? Okay, we can do that analysis too. Fact of the matter is, if the city were to have this level of analysis completed on an actual basis, where you actually had an individual come in and put together an indirect cost plan or an A87 cost plan, it would cost the city $30,000 to $50,000 to do that, number one. And number two, I would bet $1 to a donut that at the end of the day, the amount of money that is actually has a nexus to the sewer fund would be more than $250,000. So for the costs from the general fund, $127,600, and that is for the staff and some of the other things. And then you can see there, I added in the other $127,733 specifically for the public works salaries. Okay, and that we already talked about that. Again, those will only be transferred on an actual basis. All of these costs similar to the public works staff salaries, will only be transferred to the extent that they're incurred. So if, for example, you had a vacant community development director at any point in time during the year or at any point in time in the future next year, and you did not spend $172,183.72 that's in the budget, we're only going to transfer whatever was spent times 10%. Okay, at the end of the year. So if it came in at 100,000, instead of transferring 17,218, we're going to transfer 10. Okay, because that's what was actually expended and what was incurred. So all of these costs will be treated that way. And they have been treated that way as of last year. So $255,000. What I also wanted to do is react to some information that was received by the city council and the city manager with respect to sewer costs for fiscal 22-23, where it's indicated in a report that the city has spent $516,960 on personnel costs, employee and salaries and benefits costs, as it shows in the city's audit. Okay, page 22 of the city's audit does say that. It does say salaries and benefits costs are $516,000. However, this report is erroneous in its conclusion that all of the costs of the public works folks were transferred to the sewer fund from the general fund. That is not a fact, and it's not true. I'm going to reconcile for you now exactly what makes up that $516,000 so that you all have an understanding of what that is. The $516,000 includes $11,333 in direct salaries that hit the sewer fund before we did the Tyler conversion. Okay, when we did the conversion to Tyler, we did not transfer any more salaries, or we did not directly allocate any more salaries to the city sewer fund. Up to that point, though, there was a very small amount, $11,333 that was transferred. That's the only salary portion, core salary portion, that's part of that $500,000 number mentioned on page 22 of the audit. The other two numbers that are part of that are called the GASB 68 and the GASB 75 adjustments to both the pension liability and the OPEB, other post-employment benefit liability, that is required by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, that needs to true up the financial statements for every city, every jurisdiction that participates in CalPERS every year. What this does is it actually goes through and does an analysis on your funded ratio of your pension plan and your funded ratio of any health benefits you will be providing subsequent to retirement, and it trues those up. So your balance sheets for your enterprise fund and similarly your government-wide government funds rolled together, otherwise called the governmental basis of accounting, okay, need to be trued up to show what that liability is. We talk till we're blue in the face every time we do a presentation about the ebbs and the flows of the CalPERS system and how they make money one year and how they lose money another year, and how things change over time. What happened in 21-22 when we did the GASB 68, which is the pension adjustment, is you actually had a pension asset on the books, okay? That had to do with the fact that you did the bond, the pension obligation bond, and that, you know, they may have made their return, okay? But nonetheless, you had a pension asset. In fiscal 22-23, instead of having a pension asset, you went back to a pension liability. And the difference was significant. The difference was $506,000, which is the significant majority of that $500,000 that you see in the salaries and benefits line on page 22. So that $506,000 needed to be adjusted. Well, when you adjust a balance sheet and you're increasing a liability, you're increasing a credit, a normal credit balance, okay, in debit and credit accounting. When you increase a normal credit balance by $506,000, you have to increase a debit balance somewhere by $506,000. Expenses are normally a debit transaction. That's what that is. So $506,000 of the $516,000 is related to pension. And then you actually had a $921 decrease for your OPEB liability. Okay, so de minimis there. That is how that $516,960 is reconciled. The salary transfers, okay, where we're looking at the public works salary transfers, 38,732 for last year, fiscal 22-23, and the indirect administrative transfer, which up until last year was a fixed cost, okay? So the indirect administrative transfer, which is previous years, that has only been $39,000 every year. It never changed. There's no math to it. There's no science to it. It was just budgeted as $39,000 and transferred every year. That's why we did what we did last year to start doing things differently. Okay. But that $39,000 indirect administrative transfer in 22-23 and the public work transfers of 38,732, and these are exact numbers, which makes up 78,000. Those are reconciled as part of the other expenditures on that same page 22 of the audit. So if you go down, I think just below salaries and benefits, and you go down one or two categories, you see other expenses. That's where you see those costs. And the reason those costs are there is because they're treated as transfers, okay, as opposed to direct costs. That's the analysis. So I really want to bring that home, that if there are questions or concerns predominantly about some of the information that's received or disseminated, and if it's ambiguous and there's not a high level of understanding about some of the fiscal wherewithal, please let me know. Please let me know, and I will do my best to help you understand exactly what I believe might be happening. And I'm not saying the work is perfect. I'm not saying the work is always right. There's always mistakes that are made, but what's being done behind the scenes to generate these numbers and to make this information part of the equation and to actually be audited, where your auditors are coming in and they are asking for a significant amount of information. Okay, we're giving them a trial balance. Their goal is to validate that trial balance. Okay, they don't take it for face value. They're validating it. They're validating that I'm saying we have this much cash. They're validating that I'm saying the pension liability is this amount. They're validating the OPEB liability is this amount. They're validating that we have this much in receivables. All of that is validated. Every item on the balance sheet is validated by the auditor. That's their scope. That's their requirement. They have to do that. They can't issue an opinion otherwise. So if there are questions about some fiscal things, please let me know. Okay. And especially if it's a very specific question, because I will tell you what I know and have that conversation before it ends up in a letter. Okay, next slide, please. This is your water enterprise fund. Your water enterprise fund is essentially being closed out. So you can see we have the estimated actual revenue, which is actually coming from the ARPA fund. On the revenue side, $664,000 for 23-24. And actually there should be an expenditure there as well. But nonetheless, the water fund will be closed out and all the activity will take place in the current fiscal year. Next slide. Transportation. So this is just real quickly, nothing's really changed here. Gas tax, $181,000 in revenue, $113,000 in expenditures. You're still going to have about $285,000 at the end of the day. And these funds can be used for any transportation related purpose. Really, the only capital appropriation here is for street maintenance, and that is $6,827. Next slide. RMRESB1, so $167,000 in revenue, offset by $158,000 in expenditures. Still have about $460,000 in that fund as well if you do all that. Capital projects do include $158,000 appropriated for street reconstruction and resurfacing program. But you still, again, have significant capital money for transportation related purposes. Next slide. RSTP. So this one actually was updated because we received some money subsequent to May 29th. We got indication that we were going to receive money in this fund. So next year's budget, however, is 100,000 in revenue, and that's just that small amount that's anticipated for RSTP funding, offset by 105,000 in expenditures. At the end of the day, that balance will be 262,000. We have capital projects that include 66,200 for the annual sidewalk maintenance and 39,679 towards street resurfacing program. One thing I wanted to point out, so the last three funds I just went over, gas tax, RMI, ASB1, and RSTP. When you combine what's to remain, anticipated to be remaining in those funds together, at the end of next year, you still have $1 million in fund balance. So you can do some things for your transportation program. Next slide. County Library Literacy Pass-Through Fund. So this is just where we house the money that comes in from other sources specifically for the library, and then ultimately it's just transferred out. So it's just kind of a pass-through fund, if you will. But 127,000 anticipated for the revenue side. That includes 77,700 as a contribution from Glenn County for the city's library, and then another $50,000 for the literacy grant that's received on an annual basis. All of this money is indeed transferred into the general fund, which just goes to offset significantly more costs than $127,000 for the library. Only the 77,700 is transferred to the general fund. The 50,000 is given directly to the literacy program. So that's through that way. Next slide. These are just some of the other smaller library funds that are used for specific purposes. So your zip book funds, used for applicable expenditure, 9,750 is appropriated there. NorthNet Training Fund, which I think pays for internet stuff, something, 4,700 appropriated there. And then your CLSA Delivery Fund, 7,500 appropriated there. And that fund has some money in it. About 26,000 will remain there for future years. Next slide. Other miscellaneous funds, and these were funds that weren't covered as part of the preliminary budget. That's why I just want to go through these real quickly. Certified ADA Access Fund. So this is an amount that's actually charged with the business tax and the permits, business license that actually must be used for ADA purposes. So this fund hasn't been used for a few years. So if your city has anything that is ADA related and you have a need there, you have about $15,000 available to you in this fund to do for that. Willows Lighting Landscaping. So the fund balance at June 25 is expected to be 68,000. So this fund was just updated consistent with the engineer's reports that were received for the monies coming in and then the spending plan associated with next year. So we still have a pretty considerable fund balance in that fund, however, and we'll look at how that might be able to be spent. Community Discretionary Fund, I did present this with the preliminary budget. You still have about $813 there. And these revenues basically come from the loans that are paid back as part of your CDBG reuse program. That money comes back into the city and is defederalized and can be used for basically any purpose. What you're using that for in next year is your LAPCO costs and then $1,500 for other miscellaneous expenditures. Mall maintenance. So all of the activity in the mall maintenance fund, consistent with what was discussed a month ago, has been moved into the general fund. This was a separate fund of the city and didn't have a lot of money in it, just a couple $1,000. But what I'm proposing to do is actually close that fund out in 23, 24, because since I've been around, nothing's been collected in terms of revenue into the mall maintenance fund. So this is definitely a general fund. In fact, the general fund has a department for mall maintenance. So it just makes sense that we just move that all over to the general fund. State Recycling Grant Fund, $8,969 there. So this is grants that have been received previously. And typically you can receive these grants on each year to the tune of $5,000. But these must be used for recycling type activities. So what I see a lot of cities doing with this money is they're buying garbage cans that have the special recycling component built into them, and they're using this money for that to promote recycling. So you do have about $9,000 in that fund as well. Next slide. CDBG Housing Fund, no real change there. And again, this is just the fund that receives the loan payments and then ultimately moves those loan payments to the extent in the aggregate, they're under $35,000, which they always are. They're defederalized and moved over to the Community Development Fund, which is used for things like LAPCO and that. Home program income, there's no money there. And this is where we have typically appropriated the administrative costs associated with having someone come in and make sure that we are doing the loans and the loan monitoring consistent with guidelines and requirements. So because there's no money left in the home fund because loans aren't being paid back, they're all deferred right now. We actually are moving that small $1,500 payment to the general fund. Next slide. Okay, these are Project B type funds. So CDBG OTC, that's an over-the-counter grant that was received for the Rumiano Cheese Company. Went through this one before. That fund will have about $345,000 in it because Rumiano Cheese is paying their loan back, and they make a monthly payment to that effect. These funds can be reloaned consistent with a reuse program. They can only either be reloaned consistent with your reuse program, or they can be given back to the state, nothing else. They can't be put in the general fund. They can't be used for operating expenditures. They can't be used for any of that. So, but if you have a loan program and you have a reuse plan that's approved by the state, you can reloan these out. Basin Street Fund, no activity there. That fund's being closed out. Similarly, the EDA Grant Fund is being closed out, no activity. Parks Grant Fund, this is the new fund that I mentioned earlier. So you can see there, no anticipated fund balance. That's because we're appropriating everything that comes in to that fund, several $1 million for the swimming pool and Sycamore Park. So once we have more specificity on that, as projects begin to evolve, we'll come back to the council and we'll update this fund accordingly. SB2 grant, this fund needs to be reconciled. So there's $58,000 sitting in that fund with no projected expenditures for SB2. So my belief is that the city has incurred expenditures related to what the SB2 grant was originally for. And those costs may have been put in the general fund erroneously. So we're going to go back and look at that fund to see if we can do something with that. USC RDBG, to this fund accounts for the RDBG grant activity, and the amount appropriated there for the coming year is $102,000. Home grant fund, this fund has about $12,000 in it. And this fund accounts only for, similar to the OTC grant fund, only for the Sycamore Street Apartments project, and their loan is deferred. So that $12,000 is money that can be used for future loan monitoring costs and administrative costs. Next slide. These are your impact fee operating balances, and this is what will remain, assuming we use certain things. So you can see I've got that here. So the fire impact fee, about $2,000 in there, $62,000 in the police impact fee. Nothing in storm drain and streets, and that's because those funds will be used to repay the GAP loan for fiscal 24-25. The library has about $145,000, parks $341,000, and the I-5 interchange just over $400,000. What? This is your special revenue fund for ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. So this is where you receive the 2 tranches over 2 fiscal years of your ARPA money. Money came in and ultimately needed to be obligated by the end of the current calendar year, and spent by the end of the 2026 calendar year. The expenditures that we're estimating in the current year, about 797,000. If some of those expenditures don't come to fruition, those appropriations will be carried over in 24, 25. So we anticipate spending that, but at the end of the day, it may be a little bit off here or there. In 24, 25, we're appropriating what we believe will be the remaining amount, 294,208, for the ARPA money. And that includes 264 for police services, to offset those contractual costs. And then another $30,000 for the master fee schedule update. So all of these funds will have been obligated. And there's your reconciliation. And okay. I put the wrong chart in there. Put the next slide. Let me see what the next slide has. I put the wrong chart. I put that chart in twice. I started pretty adamant about that. We'll send this to the council, but all I have is a reconciliation of each year where the ARPA money was spent. And I updated that consistent. So this is the wrong table. And that is it. So I will stop there. And the staff will answer any questions your city council might have regarding the budget.
Well, thank you, Andy, for that very detailed and informative presentation. Councilmember Thomas? Questions, comments?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Comprehensive is always easy to follow. I appreciate it. The last thing you mentioned was, we used, just quickly. Hold on a second.
Just trying to find it.
Some impact fees to pay the gap loan. And that was because that gap loan was because taken out pay for advanced cash flow on those types of repairs. Is that correct? And that's
Correct.
why the attorney said that was,
I did get a legal opinion based on, actually Councilmember Sprague's suggestion to look into that. And it turned out that we could use those impact fees to pay the Umpqua gap loan, which bolstered our reserve by the end of June 30, 2025.
so, yeah, that's, I just wanted to make sure. I knew that. I wanted to say that for the public benefit. Sounds to me like you received the letter that the council got last night. There's a couple costs. You did an adequate job of explaining the salary side of it. There's also a reference in there for $650,000 here in administrative costs. Have you looked at this letter and can you answer any of those?
The full
concerns that
reconciliation
raised?
of what's been charged, what is proposed to be charged to the sewer is actually in that table that I provided.
And so none of these costs that are alleged in here have been appropriate?
The 500,000 you mean, or
600,000.
Well, it says in here that the increase in administrative costs and the hourly overcharge exceed $650,000 per year. I could not find any way $650,000 out of any of those accounts. So that was on page.
Which implies that it's illegal. It is not illegal, and you know that it's not. It is a technique wherein counting numbers are condensed or combined to make the report smaller, simpler, and easier to read with asterisks. So I'm really, it's imperative that we have credibility in the public. And since this has gone out to the public, I'm not sure how we're going to recover from all of that, but it appears that the auditor's report is nothing more than the reconciliation of the city's checkbook. Do you want to comment on that?
that's simply not correct.
Okay.
If you understood the amount of time that staff spends, which is a considerable amount of the contract cost that you actually pay me from year to year to put together the schedules and all of the information that is required to present the auditors with information other than just the trial balance out of the city's general ledger. It is extremely considerable. On top of that, the auditors are here for 3 days. Okay, they're here on site doing the audit for 3 days, requesting information from the city's financial system, requesting other reconciliation schedules that we have to put together, requesting things that are required, under GAAP and under GASB. And all of that information is provided. And each year I have a significant electronic file of all the paperwork that's put together, that is presented to the auditors and all of the schedules, that they get. And it's an extremely onerous process, to put together and facilitate an audit. It's not just looking at the checkbook.
And there are some suggestions that we're not doing certain things that we should be doing, and I hope I can find them. Let's see here. Is there I don't know. Let's see.
David,
Yes, sir.
would you please speak the cloak into your?
Okay, is that better?
hear
It's
you.
my froggy voice. I apologize. I guess maybe the last thing I will ask and then reserve the right, as Mr. Thomas has, is what was your reaction to this?
No comment.
I could comment.
Marty?
Well, actually, to say the least, it's really deeply troubling as an administrator who works every day to administer the city, to have a council member write 2 letters that basically say that I am intentionally deceiving the city council and the public to adopt budgets that are unlawful. And that as part of that, that Andy and the city attorney and all of the staff are complicit and duplicitous in deceiving all of you to pass budgets that are unlawful. Deeply troubling is the most polite way I could come up with to put it, but it's much more than that. It's much more than that.
Well, isn't there access to these questions through you and through Andy? I mean, was
Yes.
there an effort to?
Yes, there is access for all of you, and it has been offered many, many times to all of you, both in emails, in these meetings, anytime you want to meet with Andy, ask us questions. In fact, Councilmember Sprague on numerous occasions has actually said, I don't want to take up everybody's time. I'll email my questions. We've never received any of those emails or those questions. My job here is to be transparent and to answer your questions, and that's my intention, is to do the best I can to serve this community and the council. And when someone comes and explicitly is basically saying, I'm not doing that and I'm intentionally deceiving all of you, well, it is deeply troubling and disturbing. You have more access than the average public person to us to answer your questions, to make well-informed decisions on behalf of the public as a representative democracy. And frankly, I expect all of you to use those resources. I want you to be informed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Vaughn. Mr. Hudson?
Mr. Heath, you mind if I ask, what's your, for lack of a better word, what's your pedigree in dealing with financial statements and what you've given to us and what you do for the city? What's your pedigree in doing all that?
Can you speak?
What's your history?
It's really hard for me to hear.
Is this
you,
thing
but
working?
Yeah.
What's your history as far as
Resume.
resume as a finance consultant?
What's your professional background? History and
My professional background?
Yes, sir.
doing the work that you do.
What's your resume, Andy?
Yeah, I'm assuming that you've
Yeah,
gone
but-
to college for this. I'm
Um,
assuming you've been doing this for how many years?
How long do you have?
No, we've got all afternoon. Go for it.
I have to go at 4.
I've been in government finance for 34 years. I started in government finance in 1990 with the city of San Jose, worked there for 15 years from an account clerk level all the way to deputy director of finance level for the city's treasury division. While at the city, I was responsible for just about every aspect of accounting in the accounting division. Whether it be general ledger, whether it be payroll. I was the city's payroll manager for 2 years, 6,000 employees. I put the audits together. I put the single audits together. I put the cost plan together. Pretty much everything in accounting I did. From there, I left Auburn in 2005 and went to city of Auburn. I left San Jose in 2005 and went to the city of Auburn. Where I was the city's finance director for 8 years. So there I was responsible for putting the budget together. I was responsible for facilitating the audit with the auditors under several different auditors. I was responsible for financial forecasting. I was responsible for the city's general ledger and the integrity of that general ledger and making sure that it was correct. I was responsible for pretty much all things finance, in addition to IT, human resources, and risk management. So all of those functions fell under my purview, as the administrative services / finance director for the city of Auburn. From there, I was recruited to go to Placer County. I went to Placer County in 2013 as a deputy county executive officer, responsible for putting the county budget together. That was my responsibility. $1 billion budget now, and I did that for 4 budget cycles. And during my tenure there, which is just under 4 years, I was promoted to number 2 in the county as assistant county executive for Placer County. That was my responsibility. I had a close working relationship with the county auditor controller and also the county treasurer tax collector in all things fiscal, and worked kind of in that triangle to do everything for the county from a fiscal perspective. It was then that I went on my own and wanted to do contract work and work independently. Since I've been doing that, the majority of my work has been around forecasting, which you have, and I have done for over 30 jurisdictions across California. I've also been asked to assist certain jurisdictions with budget help. I've helped many jurisdictions with audit help. And in fact, this year, I think I've done 5 or 6 audits with different jurisdictions this year. And that is at some level facilitating the work that's being done to perform the audit by the auditors. So I've been around and I love what I do. I think I'm good at it, and I think I deliver a good product. And one thing that I strive for, and everybody that works with me knows this, is I want to be uber transparent about what's being put together. There's nothing being hidden. There's no back door to anything. My goal in working as a contractor for cities is to find money, to find what's not being reported, to find where things may exist that you may not know about. Not egregiously so, but just because you may not know about it. There may be your trust funds, for example, are a prime example of that. You've got all this money sitting in these small trust funds that nobody ever talks about. Okay, well, how are we going to use those in the future? That's what I try to do in cities, and that's how I sell myself.
So, and that wasn't, I just wanted that for the record to show that you have multiple years and multiple different jurisdictions and titles underneath your belt handling financial situations, not just for the city of Willows. This isn't your first rodeo, right? You've ran the whole circuit. And so I'm going to take what you say when you say, this is real, this is what's actually happening, and this is correct. And that the auditors that come in and audit our systems that probably have pretty close pedigree to yours or in the beginning stages, right? Done a lot of the same things. Say, you guys are doing great work. Good job. Okay. You guys are being lawful, not unlawful, as a lot of the statements are said in the letter that we received last night. So I just wanted that being stated so that we understand who's actually going through our paperwork, so that anybody that's listening or watches this later on understands we're not taking this. I don't take this lightly. None of the 4 of us take this lightly. So I appreciate the work that you do for us. Quite frankly, the letter that I find here, I don't understand how this is still coming up. I've been here since October. This item has been brought up multiple times. Each time it has been answered either by the city attorney, by you yourself, Andy, or through the audits. Some other facet has been answered multiple times, just in that short period of time. So to me, this is almost borderline just harassment of our city manager, and let alone slander against all of us as city council members that we're not doing our job. Our job is to find the best people to do the jobs that we can't put together a forecast like this, nor can I balance the city's budget sheet. I can do my own, but I can't do the city's. And so I appreciate the time that you guys put into this. I take offense to the fact that, we're being called out and we're not doing our jobs and plain dumb. I don't consider myself a dumb person. Maybe not the smartest person around, but I'm not the dumbest. So thank you for what you do. And that's the only reason why I asked about your background, was because I wanted it on the record, you know, that you know exactly what you're doing. You've done this several times and you've been in this realm for, like you said, 34 years nonstop. You've watched it evolve, you've watched it change, you've done all that. That being said, I am going to go to your forecast and ask a couple questions now. First one, hold on, I folded the pages so I wouldn't lose them as easily. When you were talking about the unfunded CalPERS.
Yep.
Will that slowly ever get paid off? Or are we just making essentially the minimum payment
Well,
on a credit card?
Yeah, good question. So I mean, at one point it was paid off, which is why you didn't have a UAL payment. So when you
Okay.
bonded for it, you essentially paid it off. Okay,
Okay.
you got the money from the people that, bought the bonds,
Mhm.
and you took that money and you gave it to CalPERS.
Okay.
Okay, so you paid it all off. You were
Right.
over 100% funded, which is part of the issue with that $500,000 adjustment. You had a pension asset, and then when CalPERS started losing money and everything flows through, now you have a pension liability again, which is why you have to recognize that expense.
Bad investments, things like
But
that.
what happened over the last couple of years is CalPERS they lost money 2 years ago. And then last year they did not meet their discount rate. Okay, so that has an adverse impact
Mhm.
on the UAL where it increases it. All right, and then that's parlayed down to every jurisdiction basically. And you have to now amortize that new UAL over 20 years and make that payment.
So is there a way for the city to better protect itself from CalPERS making bad investment choices for our employees, or?
Well, you as policymakers can certainly apply pressure. It's something, actually, Andy and I are both a little upset about because the CalPERS board is increasing its funding to climate change investments. And regardless of your political thoughts or feelings about it, they're using, our pensions and what you pay for as cities to frankly gamble with, is the way I see it. And so, I have very little influence, you do as well, but as policymakers, you can certainly try to apply some pressure to the CalPERS board. I mean, it's a pension plan for public employees. It shouldn't be used as a way, as some sort of, let's diversify our portfolio and take risks. It's people's retirements.
Right, that's.
So, I mean, I think the only, way to protect ourselves is to try to apply pressure to the CalPERS board to treat it like a pension plan, not like some, groovy portfolio that you get to do whatever you want with.
It's not a billionaire stock portfolio.
Yeah,
you're saying.
right, exactly. Because who pays the price when they lose? We do. The employees pay and the cities frankly pay the bulk of it. They don't say, oh, gee, sorry, we'll just pick up the tab this year. They just pass it down the line to the cities to pay.
So I am optimistic, council member, that CalPERS this year will meet their investment objective. So, which is 6.8%. I mean, everything I'm looking at indicates that they should make that or exceed it, maybe 10%, maybe something like that. If that transpires, then you'll see those returns built into actuarial reports 2 years from now. So you'll start to see a smoothing maybe of that UAL cost, but
So there's a chance for it to go down. That's what my next question.
there
was.
is a
If-
chance.
If
Yes.
they actually do perform,
Yes.
then there's
Yeah.
a chance. Okay.
But the only way it really is probably going to get better, short of them changing their policies, is with more and more public sector employees now becoming PEPRA under the newer structure that was implemented by former Governor Jerry Brown in 2012, and fewer classic employees, which are really the bulk of the unfunded pension liability in all cities throughout the state. That's really, it's just time. I mean, it's an ongoing joke that all the classic employees have to die, but sorry, but that it is a matter of time. Well, because they've got to go away and then the new employee, I mean, PEPRA mostly pays for itself. There's a very little, it's a lot less than a classic employee of unfunded pension liability.
Okay. And then one thing, going back to the sewer fund, on here, I just noticed $1,066,089 restricted. Did you answer? What does that mean? Like it's restricted? That's on slide
Which,
14.
where was that?
On slide 14.
Slide 14.
Yeah, it says
restricted.
projected sewer fund balance at June 30th, 25. It gives a 2,400,000.
106,608.9. So, yeah. let
Yeah,
me
that
tell you.
restricted number.
Is
What's
that the
that?
bond?
So
money?
that's actually the budget itself.
Is that the bond?
No, yeah, it's partially the bond. So that is, let me find it. On agenda packet page. Agenda packet page 59 is your sewer fund. So you can see there that there's working capital reserved for future capital, which is 522, 483. That amount is the remaining bond money that will be left basically if you do everything that we talked about.
Right.
And then the other $543,000 is what's called a debt service reserve.
Oh,
And that is set aside for your final payment of the sewer debt that you have on the books right now. So sometimes instead of getting a debt insurance policy, which a lot of jurisdictions do, you just set up a reserve where you have that set aside. It's there for that final payment to be made. So that's what's made up of.
Perfect. And then one of my other questions was on the water enterprise fund. There's a revenue, but there's no expenditure. Was that the money that was used to put in the line to tie in Cal Water to the city pumps
no, that what we used, ARPA funds for that connection.
for that connection?
Yeah.
Okay. That connection essentially is saving us, the city, money, correct, by doing that?
Well, yes, the water fund was only serving 3 customers and it was running at a deficit. And we also, I did figure this out, actually. I meant to tell you, Mayor Hansen, that the past years, the GGA payments,
Mhm.
we were paying out of there, although we were operating at a deficit, so it still hit the general fund. But that payment
Okay.
was being allocated to that fund.
Yeah, thank you.
But we were really, the operational costs were about double what was actually being brought in on the revenue side. So then it gets shored up by the general fund.
Okay.
And also, I think the other thing to keep in mind is all the regulations for drinking water, pretty stringent. They're going to get more stringent.
Right.
And so we didn't want to be doing that for
I
3
remember
customers.
something being said that the pumps had to have new filters put in. They're going to cost a lot of money to keep
Mhm,
up with the chromium
correct.
filtration levels that we had to do. One last question on the transportation. It says that we'll have about $1 million available. Is that what we're using for like the streets that we discussed during last night's meeting?
Last night's meeting was only about SB1 funds, and that was only because we're required to submit a list to the state. That's why we had to come to you.
Right.
So there's still options for looking at other road transportation projects, which we've already started talking about since
Okay.
last night.
I
So,
just didn't know if you
We'll
guys
bring
had-
something
if
back
that
to the
was
council.
already something that was in the, already got a list that you're working on, or if that was like, hey, what do you guys want us to do with this?
Well, I think based on your feedback from last night, I think we are going to, we're planning to come back with some sort of a proposal and plan to the council in the next couple of months.
Perfect. And then my last question, I wrote down was, you mentioned that regarding the sewer fund, you could do there was a nexus study that you said something about a nexus study on that, on those funds to allocate money, and possibly could be more than what we're currently using, the current percentage that we're using.
I think Andy meant that we could do a cost allocation study that would cost $30,000 or $40,000 to evaluate whether or not what we're proposing for a cost allocation is accurate. And his experience suggests that we're probably undercharging the sewage fund for cost allocation. But the only way to really be accurate about that is to do that nexus study. I don't know if you called it a nexus study, but yeah, that study.
Well, A87 cost allocation plan.
And it just, that costs money to
Typical.
do,
It's
so.
not, it's not typical for a city this size to have a plan like that. They're
Right.
pretty involved. They need to be updated annually. And it's a significant amount of work. Because you're looking at every single component and activity and function in the city and deciding, what those people are doing in that function, what percentage of them and all this, and it looks
That's
at
related to sewage.
everything.
And then when it comes to the city staff reviewing documents that they receive regarding sewer funds, is that being charged to the sewer fund as well? I mean, I'm assuming that that's included in those percentages, right?
Documents,
Well, when more and more questions get brought up, packets handed out by,
well, it certainly
folks
would
that-
increase our cost allocation to the sewage fund for sure. Anything that we're doing related to
even though the questions,
PRA
even
requests,
though the questions have been answered multiple times
correct.
and they're being re-asked, they're still being allocated back.
Well, and when we have to
Just
involve
just to
contractors,
Re-answer the same
yes,
question.
and
Okay,
sometimes we have to involve contractors like the city engineer, and of course now the city clerk is also a contractor.
perfect. And I will reserve my right as well to speak again, but I'm done for now.
Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Mr. Sprague?
Well, I'm just gonna start out with, wow. Those are quite some comments. So let me do the best I can. I should have taken notes sequence here, but the answer, I'll start out with Rick's question, my $650,000 that I identified it. As I identified in my breakdown, I went through the time codes. And for the some odd 12,000 hours worth of work that the sewer fund covered, it looked like, less than 600 hours were actually spent on the sewer. So the short math there was that the cost for that 550 hours that the city staff spent working on the sewer was approximately $25,000. So then I took that and rounded it off at about $500,000. And then looking on page number 15 of the slide that Andy just went through, specifically identifies that 4 of those workers that are already being paid out of the sewer fund for the work that they do are in fact another $127,000. I did not have the advantage of these exact numbers that we were provided here today, but I added that then of the suggested $262,000 for administration costs. I backed out the $127,000. I came up with approximately another $100,000 or so. That's how I arrived at the approximate $650,000 that it appears to be being overcharged. A lot of this discussion could have been alleviated had I been able to get a copy of, and you sort of alluded to it, and I would like to see what you gave me verbally, Andy, if you would break it down, how that $517,000 in the auditor's report is actually arrived at. How did they arrive at that? Had I gotten this single page that we've been able to get for the last 15, 20 years that itemized specifically the salaries, the overtime, the PERS payment, the health insurance, et cetera, as an itemized line item breakdown, as opposed to what I received, which was a masked printout of, and I know why you have a masked printout of the funds. It's so that you can avoid hackers, but that does not provide a councilman or the public a breakdown like this, that where you can look at it at a glance and see how you arrived at that. Had I been able to receive this from the city manager, this would have maybe saved us a whole lot of grief, and it certainly would have saved me some deep dive into the budget. In regard to, I was very careful, Marty, to not accuse you. I was very careful when I couched my letter to the council as observations and questions regarding possible continued misuse of funds. So if you took offense to that, then I sincerely apologize. I thought I walked very carefully just to ask those questions. And as opposed to having this debate and having to argue with my colleagues and argue with staff, I specifically asked that we pass this over to the city attorney for her review and to see how accurate or not accurate my assessments were. At any rate, and then Andy, I would like to understand a little bit better, if I understand your narrative that you were explaining this $517,000, 550 hours were worked by staff. Are you suggesting then that the PERS picks up is that an ongoing cost association with PERS to the tune of
GASB
another
68
$500,000?
The GASB 68 adjustment for PERS and the GASB 75 adjustment for the OPEB have nothing to do with hours worked currently by existing staff. Nothing. It is simply an adjustment that is posted to the personnel costs because it's personnel cost related, it's retirement related, and it's health benefit related.
Right.
Okay? That is the only place you can put this cost. It's the cost or the revenue, which it was 2 years ago, associated with adjusting the liability on the balance sheet. Okay, and you have to show that liability because it's required by GASB and it's required by GAAP. Okay, for your government-wide statements and your enterprise-wide statements. That amount, when that liability on the balance sheet is adjusted, if the liability goes up, the credit goes up. Well, when you have a credit go up, you have to have a corresponding debit go up. The only debit that goes up is personnel costs. That's why you see that's where it's just, and I hate using this word, but that's where it's plugged to show those costs, because you have to show them somewhere. All right.
Okay,
And
you
they
have to-
are applicable personnel costs.
That's the operative word. You have to show them somewhere. So you have 5 employees working for public, works, working on the sewer fund, or coming out of the sewer fund, but you have 23 city employees. So am I to understand then that you attributed all those costs associated with CalPERS, whether up or down, that you attributed then to solely the public works or the
That's
sewer
right.
fund? Pardon me?
That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
And keep in mind that those costs are only 9% of the total costs associated with that. You can imagine what the government-wide side of the equation, which had 91%, basically that 500,000 times 9,
Okay.
okay, is posted to the government-wide funds, not the general fund, not the sewer fund, or not the sewer fund, not the gas tax fund, government-wide, which is all other funds. That's what GASB 34 does. GASB 34 says you have to report all of this, everything associated with what's going on in your city on a balance sheet, aside from your fund level statements, okay, which is just your general fund, your special revenue fund, your sewer fund. They're all reported like it's a going concern and a business.
Okay, but again, the question is then you're attributing all those costs solely to the sewer fund. You're not distributing it across the other general fund.
No,
You're
that's
not.
correct.
Okay, that's the answer then that I'm asking. So you attributed all of that to the sewer fund?
Yeah.
For all 23 employees?
For however many, for the employees that I showed you up
For
on
the,
the,
for the 5 employees?
that's right. For
So
those employees
500
only.
So you're saying $500,000, $100,000 for each one of those employees?
No, that's incorrect.
Hmm.
That's not
Okay,
correct.
do me a favor. Give me the written breakdown that you discussed so that I can understand it.
The adjustment is a one-time adjustment that's done once a year at the end of the year, consistent with the information that's put together to adjust what the city's aggregate liability is for pension and for OPEB.
Okay,
Okay. If the liability goes up, the expenses have to go up. If the liability goes down and actually becomes an asset, you had a net pension asset 2 years ago, then your expenses get credited. In fact, I would implore you to look at the prior year's audit to see if there was a big credit expense in personnel expenditures for the sewer fund at the 21-22 audit. I don't have it in front of me, but I'll bet that it's a big credit because you had a big credit that year.
okay. How much of that, the money that you're talking about and the expenses that you're talking about, how much of that came out of the general fund?
How much of what came out of the sewer fund?
No, the general fund, you said. How much came out of the general fund?
None came out of the general fund.
None
It
of-
came out of government wide. Okay. This is what GASB 34 does. Okay. It takes basically every other fund in the city and it rolls it up into a full accrual presentation, as opposed to a modified accrual presentation, which is what the basic financial statements do for general, gas tax, the RSTP, impact fees, et cetera. All those funds, other than the sewer fund, are aggregated and then presented on a government-wide basis that includes all assets and liabilities, including capital, all your equipment, depreciation on your equipment. It includes debt, all the debt, the remaining debt to be paid, et cetera, and it includes liabilities, just like the OPEB liability and the pension liability. If you look at the fund statements for the general fund, RSTP, gas tax, whatever, those special revenue funds, you're not going to see any of that asset stuff. You're not going to see any of the debt remaining stuff. You're not going to see any of the liability stuff. That's because they're not those are presented on a budgetary basis. GASB 34 rolls everything up. So when we adjust that, because the sewer fund is your only enterprise fund, which is a proprietary fund, which is a business type fund,
Absolutely.
it has to be presented on a full accrual basis. Has to.
Understand.
That's why it gets that share of that expenditure, which is 9% of the aggregate every year. Whatever, if it's an expenditure, if it's a revenue, it's a revenue. And it gets 9% of that. That's the way it works.
May I get a printout similar to this for the 22-23?
So I thought we sent you a trial balance for all the years you requested. Did we not?
What I got was about 45 pages of 2-point font print.
Because you wanted it by detail. I think you said
I
that.
wanted this. I
Okay.
didn't want it by
Mom,
detail. I
please.
wanted
Yeah,
the
that-
summary.
That's
want-
summary.
I wanted the summary.
What's this? But for
Yeah, well, we
more
don't,
recent years than
yeah,
Mrs.
it
Mom's.
doesn't look like this, but we'll send you a trial balance.
Okay, that's what I asked for, was a summary. The summary would have answered a lot of the questions that I put into this, into my narrative.
But I can tell you, you will not be able to reconcile that trial balance with what the components are of personnel, because it's going to be rolled up at a summary level.
I'm gonna park the issue on the sewer fund until I get the public information that I've requested and the other stuff that you've got. So going back to the budget you presented here, page 24.
Page 24.
And it says the funds used for the gap repay, the gap loan. The gap loan was for Basin Street, if I'm not mistaken. Is that the gap loan that we're making reference to?
I didn't hear the question.
The Umpqua Gap loan, yes, it's related to that. Is the Umpqua Gap loan related to Basin Street?
Oh, yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It was for the Basin Street Bridge, correct?
Or
The
one
gap loan.
one of the projects,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Okay, so the 2008 Nexus study that increased that identified the impact fees. Specifically identified number one for the storm drain impact fees. It identified specifically two zones, Zone A and Zone B. Zone A was everything north of Green Street, north of Wood Street, excuse me. And Zone B was everything south of the canal on the south side of town. Specifically identified Zone B, A, and Zone B. Zone A was very specific in that the funds that were raised for Zone A, in fact, had to be spent in Zone A. The only flexibility that it had is if they identified, and they did identify a specific project on Humboldt for those storm drain development fees. The flexibility within that zone is after that money was collected and it was determined that growth went a different way than what was anticipated, they could take that money and move it to another project within Zone A. That was fine. If they had something identified specifically for Humboldt, and then they decided later that it would be better if that money were spent on a flood control project or a storm drain project on Lassen, they could do that. But by law and by the Nexus study itself prohibited any of that money to be transferred out of that zone. Similarly, the streets for the proposition, or excuse me, the Nexus study of 2008 identified specifically the existing streets within the city limits. And it identified specifically a zone for that. Again, now we've taken those funds and we've moved them out where the money was actually collected, where it was supposed to be beneficial to that area. It was then moved out of the zone. I would ask then, if I read this correctly, that you have an attorney's opinion that suggested, Marty, that was well within the limits. Can I get a copy of that attorney's opinion of that, please?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. I had a couple of other questions here. Excuse me. Just a minute. Andy, you did mention that the $39,000 had been ongoing for quite some time. the reason that that $39,000 came about was that your predecessor, the then finance director, in fact, admitted that he was taking somewhere north of $30,000, $40,000 a year to pay the police out of the sewer fund. And of course, that was, I think at that time was a $68,000 budget item, which was justified by his breakdown on a proportionate share. The sewer fund study, if I recall correctly, suggested that was done in 21, suggested that that number go up to $95,000 for the first year, and then I think it was 105 or 120,000 or so in there. So at any rate, I just wanted to correct you on that $39,000. That was why, because they had to go back and reduce that administration fee because they were misusing it for a number of years to pay the police, and that would be inappropriate. I don't have a problem and didn't have a problem with the suggested increase to around $100,000 for the obvious impact that it would have for other staff. But I do disagree that it goes up to $260,000, even though you've got a breakdown here. I don't see the justification for that particular. You know, I think I'm just going to leave it at that. I would like, without a doubt, our budget is wanting. And if the sales tax passes, in fact, it will help relieve some of the problems. But again, what I see, unless I can get other evidence of this, it still appears to me that we're siphoning from the sewer fund to the general fund to augment the general fund. Regardless of what you say, I do the math, and that's what it appears to me. I made it very clear in my breakdown, my letter to the council last night. I think I made it very clear in there that how I see that money is, unless proven and given some other information to be proven wrong, I think that that's what we're still doing. And then I would then reserve to be able to comment again on my letters after I get the public information that I. So shame on me for asking the hardball questions. Shame on me for presenting this stuff in a format that I think was easy to understand. And if everybody got offended by it, then my sincere apologies, but I stand by my paperwork. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Andy, I know the answer, but how long have you served City of Willows as finance consultant?
How long have you served as finance?
Can you hear me
consultant?
okay?
2 years and 9 months.
Almost 3 years. In your history with working with the City of Willows, have you ever identified any waste, fraud, abuse, or misappropriation of funds related to the sewer enterprise fund?
No.
Same question related to any other funds within the city funds as a whole?
No.
No, the answer is no.
No.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for outlining your vast experience in the finance business. And we are so fortunate to have you here with City of Willows. And I and I know my colleagues on the council, at least the majority of the council, definitely appreciate your outstanding service to City of Willows. So thank you for everything that you do for us.
Mr. Mayor, may I respond to that, please?
I'm speaking right now.
Okay.
No, I am speaking right now.
That's fine. When
Thank you.
I asked if I may.
We all get it.
You
We-
finish up and then.
We all get a turn, as you know how this works. Okay, when I chair a meeting, I always, out of courtesy, I go last. Okay,
Thanks.
very good. Thank you. Once again, we received a letter last night that we've been discussing here from Mr. Sprague. It's further ongoing rhetoric, his opinions concerning the sewer enterprise funds. As Mr. Hudson pointed out, these questions, all of these questions related to the sewer enterprise fund have been answered time and time and time again by our extremely competent, knowledgeable, honest, ethical staff and consultants. When will this ever end? When will this rhetoric ever end? This is a complete waste of time, going backwards, not forwards. These questions have been answered and addressed. There's no waste, fraud, abuse, and misappropriation of funds related to the sewer enterprise fund. With that said, I found your letter offensive, insulting, dishonest, and intentionally misleading, as your previous rhetoric has also been along the same lines, and I've expressed my thoughts in open session before about that. This is ridiculous. It's a waste of time. There's no reason for this. So you've accused me, Mr. Sprague, of being unethical or corrupt or whatever for years. You are absolutely incorrect. I've sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and Constitution of the State of California and uphold the laws of the land, the state, federal, local laws, at least 11 times, possibly 12 in my career, which is right now at 46, 47 years. 4 of those oaths of office I took right here in this chambers in reference to the city council. The previous oaths I took in reference to my law enforcement career. I am absolutely insulted, and I'm absolutely up to my eyebrows over these constant attacks. And now you're attacking the city manager and the finance consultant, accusing them of corruption. You're now attacking my colleagues on the city council, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Vodden, and Mr. Hudson, of corruption, as well as me. That's old news. You've done this to me for years. I'm used to it, okay? I have a thick skin, so keep it up. I'm sure you will. This is absolutely inappropriate. It's disgusting. It's dishonest. It's misleading, period. It has no basis in this chambers. These questions have been answered and answered and answered. There's absolutely no waste, fraud, or abuse or misappropriation to the sewer enterprise funds or any other portion of this budget. I'm offended. I'm offended for my colleagues, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Vodden, Mr. Hudson. I'm offended on behalf of our city manager and our finance consultant. That is absolutely ridiculous. It's inappropriate. It's wrong. It needs to stop. Period. Once again, I'm offended. I continue to be offended. But you continue to act inappropriately as a city council member. You are doing a disservice to the city of Willows, in my mind. That's what I wanted to say. I've said it. Hopefully, we won't have to have another public discussion about this ongoing sewer enterprise fund rhetoric and nonsense. It's absolutely unproductive. It's counterproductive. As I've said before, I feel that your quest is to destroy the city of Willows at all costs. I firmly believe that. I strongly believe that. It's wrong. I don't know why you're serving in the city council. I have no idea. No idea. But you're doing the city of Willows a disservice. And I'm offended on behalf of my colleagues and our personnel here with the city of Willows for having to put up with this nonsense and this rhetoric. We've got serious business to do here. We have a municipality to run here. And we're doing the best we can following the law. I sort of say, I'm honest, ethical. I follow the law. I subscribe to the law enforcement code of ethics. I always have. I'm still involved in the law enforcement business, even though I'm retired after a very successful, very long career. I'm still working in the law enforcement business on a part-time basis as a special investigator with the state of California. If you don't know that, I've been doing that since I officially retired I just continue doing that, and I continue to serve. I not only subscribe to the law enforcement code of ethics, and follow the law enforcement code of ethics and believe in it. I also instruct on it. I've been instructed on it for, I don't know, about 35 years now. So I'm offended, and I continue to be offended by your behavior. It's wrong. Needs to stop. With that, Andy, I really appreciate your very clear, concise analysis and report. I've been on the council here right at about 15 years. I've been through 15 budget cycles. All of my questions have been answered. All of my questions were answered at our budget workshop, but I really appreciate the fine work that you do in putting these documents together. It's much appreciated. Marty, likewise with you and your staff. I know that you contribute significantly and greatly to this process as well, also as the city manager. But I definitely appreciate you and your professionalism. And like I said, we're lucky as an organization to have you here, Andy, to have you on our side working with us. And, I just can't, publicly, praise you enough for the fine work that you do. It's appreciated. So thank you very much. With that, Marty, you mentioned, oh, okay, I'll back up just a second in reference to the, impact fees. So, Andy, if you could just please, bear with me and refresh my memory. I know that the storm drain and streets, impact fees were utilized to repay the gap loan. What was that amount again? What was that amount? I know, I've read it.
Between
It's been
300,000 and
discussed.
400,000, right?
Actually, it's
Between the two accounts, it
Um,
was a little over $600,000. I'm sorry,
600,000.
a little over 600,000.
Was it?
it's right around that.
It depends upon which calculation you looked at. One was 587, I think, and another one was 610. All depends which document you're looking at.
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
thank you. This is great.
So about
400,000.
341,000.
341,000.
That was out of the storm
Combined.
drain. That was out of the storm drain amount.
Storm and street combined.
So storm
drain
drain
and
was
streets.
156,220 and streets was 186,600.
That's your recent, I'm sorry, that's your recent transfer that you're talking about. That's the most recent.
We took all of the balance in the storm drain and streets.
Right.
And used that to balance the budget and pay the Umpqua loan.
Right.
And the total was 341.
What I'm making reference to this is the storm drain and the sewer were taken down some 3 or 4 years ago to be the city's match on the original grant for the
Mr. Sprague, okay.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't know.
I'm still commenting, so
Okay,
please, please, okay. So the storm drain and streets were approximately $341,000 used to repay the gap loan, correct?
Well, it was used as a source in the general fund, which, to balance the budget.
Exactly.
So yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, transfer basically. Yeah, exactly. I'd seen that amount. I hadn't seen it yesterday or today when I was going through the staff reports and the budget documents again. So no, thank you very much. And and Rick mentioned this earlier, but the gap loan was a loan taken out with Umpqua Bank as just for the public's benefit. I know this was touched on earlier to cover the advanced costs while waiting for EDA grant and other monies to come in from our other funding sources. That's what the gap loan was for. Okay, just for verification, our city attorney has opined that utilizing the storm drain and streets impact fees to repay the gap loan were completely lawful and appropriate, correct? Ms. Brown?
Yes, the city engineer, myself, and another attorney at Prentice Long worked quite a bit on this for about 48 hours I needed to get answers from the city engineer and go back and forth with the attorney at Prentice Long to figure this out. And the three of us, it was touch and go, but we got there.
Yeah,
So
very good.
yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I had no further question in reference to budget, Andy. I mean, in your budget documents that you presented, all my questions have been answered very clearly, concisely. And thank you very much again. I just wanted to touch, Marty, you mentioned CalPERS. Oh my God. What the CalPERS board should do is fire all of the CalPERS financial strategists, anybody involved in investing, just lay them off, fire them, and hire Stifel. Because I utilize Stifel. My family's utilized Stifel for decades, and as well as I. And Stifel could very well make that benchmark every year because we do. It's this politically correct poor investment strategy by CalPERS is insane. Their sole job is to support the pension funds, and they are not doing it. It's horrible. It's just terrible. And this politically correct investment strategy is losing money and costing every municipality in the state of California a fortune every year. It's absolute. It's disgusting. And it continues. So Marty, I agree. I believe that as elected officials, we should lay the pressure on the CalPERS board. I know I do privately. Of course, you've seen how well that's worked, but it's bizarre. I just don't understand it. It's complete mismanagement of the entire investment fund. And here we go. A couple of years ago, we had a very successful pension obligation fund. And Evan, we wiped out that huge deficit that we had. We wiped it out. And we had a couple of years of zero costs, and here we are. You know, we knew this would happen, right? But here we are creeping up again. It's wrong. And it's the CalPERS board doing that to every municipality who participates in CalPERS in the state of California. And it's just, it should be criminal for crying out. But anyway, I feel better now. Send me a bill for the therapy. So really, that's all I had. But once again, Andy and Marty, thank you very much. Mr. Vaughn, yes.
Yeah, I think we're going about this the wrong way. We're having a debate between a very experienced, accounting-oriented, diverse individual who does this for a living and force interpretation of data over time for some time. And this debate's going back and forth. And now I guess we've agreed to disagree. But I think if you look at the last paragraph here, which it says, when the Willows voters learn how the sewer fund has been unlawfully administered, and then it talks, they will understand that they can't trust the city and that any more, or the use of more tax dollars, which is aimed right at the sales tax thing that we desperately need and we all support. I think that what I really need to know, Forrest, if you could help me understand, what is the end product here? What if, in detail, I request that you tell me what step-by-step you see as the solution to the claims that you make. What happens next? What is the outcome? I mean, the dialogue isn't going to stop apparently. And so what happens? What do you want to happen?
I want the information that I've
Why?
requested. Why? So that I know that it's being, let me answer a real quick question, just real simple.
Please do answer the why.
Why?
Why you want this information at this point?
Why
And
I want
what's
to see this
what's the
information?
outcome? I want to know. What is going to happen? Are we going to fire people? Are we going to shut the city down? Are we going to, what, we could just say you were right and we all win? Is that what we're after here? Is you were right, Forrest. You're right. Are we done now?
No, we're not done yet. Okay, so let me just
Please,
ask the real
please.
quick question that'll answer your question. Out of the, using the 22-23 year for the 12,350 hours that the sewer, or excuse me, that the public works people worked, how many of those hours were paid out of the general fund for the general fund work activity that they did?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I have that number.
You do have
For
that
last
number?
year, for 22-23, I absolutely have that number.
You have
Yes.
that number?
Yep.
Okay, that's what I'm requesting. I want to see that because it appears to me over the.
That wasn't previously requested for the
I'm
record.
sorry,
That was not previously requested for the record.
I've requested that several times, not of you, but I have requested it over the years several times and I've never received it. It's always been come back that it was paid out of the sewer fund.
So just so you know, I kind of pride myself in the way I work with the cities I work with on having relationships with the folks that I work with, from staff all the way up to the governing board. Most of them have my phone number. Most of them can text me. Most of them can get a hold of me through email. Most of them can ask me directly what if they have a question. Of course, I will always, if ever I get a question from a governing body member, council member, supervisor, whoever it might be, the president of the board, whoever, I'm going to work with the district manager or the city manager or whoever to make sure they understand what I'm going to respond to.
Okay.
And how I'm going to respond.
And I appreciate your offer to communicate directly with me. However, our protocol in the city, it disallows me to have any direct communication with you. Okay, I'm disallowed from that. So I've sent my information either request through the city clerk or the city mayor or the city manager. So anyway, that's great. But if you could find that out for me, it would go a long ways to be able to satisfy some concern. Without a doubt, Mr. Keith has a credentials that I don't have. But I have worked at the state senate, and there were two particular issues that I focused in on what I thought was misuse of public funds. dealing with the Office of Public School Construction and the Department of General Services. And I got admonished by state senators and a couple of assemblymen and even a couple of the governor's staff, admonishing me similarly to the admonishment that I've just received from you. However, I was able to get the attention of the state auditor. And the state auditor did come in and take a look at my findings and in fact followed up. And as a result of that, the governor had to request the resignations from a couple of department heads. So I'm not going to put my match my credentials with Mr. Heath here by any stretch of the imagination, but I will match my ability to continue to get the answers that I seek so that I can have a comfort level that we're not misusing these good people, the public monies, and that we're using it in the right way. And until I can get adequate answers to the questions, beat me up and cuss me out as much as you want, Mr. Mayor. But I'm going to continue on my quest to get the information. Okay? So, if you took offense, David, if you're asking me where I'm headed for that, I'm asking for the right answers. That's all. I want to have a comfort level that we're not misusing and misappropriating the people's money. It's just that simple.
I mean, hasn't there been enough evidence?
Pardon me?
Have you not received enough
No, I have
valid,
not.
educated evidence? No, you have not. You have not. Okay.
Pardon me?
You have not.
I have not.
Nothing that Andy has said convinces you that despite the repeated
What Andy has
statements,
said,
the
is
audit
that-
was good, the sewer fund has not been siphoned off and misused and reallocated. That's being said by people with credibility.
right,
Why does that not weigh?
okay.
I'm going to go on here because I think the answer, part of the answer might rest in this sales tax thing. Because it says here that they're not going to support the sales tax once they realize that we can't be trusted. And then it says, said to civic leaders, business owners, and concerned citizens, I respectfully request information on who you sent that qualified, everybody that got this, their name and their address, so we can reach out to them and send them the counterpoint 1-to-1.
All you got to do is walk down Wood
No,
Street.
no.
and Amos
You have a
Lane.
list. We'd like your list with your addresses, please. Oh,
Okay.
well, again, I rest with this. We have credible, intelligent, certified people saying there is no problem. We have an audience listening that is going to take away the simplest version of all of this, which in very likely will be that we're untrustworthy, which negates the sales tax, which negates the revenue for the city, which shuts the city down.
Okay, so give me the evidence and the answers to the questions that I've got. They can talk all day long. I'll give you a good example. This is one that I've asked for several times. This is going back to the vehicle maintenance historically, and now we're down to about $6,000 or $7,000 a year by your breakdown. One year we went from $16,000 to $116,000. Nobody has ever shown me where that additional $100,000 got spent. Nobody has ever shown that to me. I've asked for it several times. The same with other line items on this breakdown is when I can compare these and do a 10-year comparison and I see these big jumps in this summary, and I've asked what caused this jump? Crickets, nothing. Just take my word for it. I've looked at it, Forrest, and it looks just fine. There's no discredit to either the city manager or to Mr. Heath, other than not being able to get the information that backs up the number.
Well,
That's the
could
problem.
we not deal with this going forward? I mean, technically, this is a deal killer. The way it's being handled, it's just defaming the city and the people who run it. And it's creating an impression amongst the public that it's really bad, that we're really wrong and unlawful. I mean, could we do this going forward and fix the problem instead of, get even with people or
I'm not
divine
trying to get
retribution?
even with
Well, I don't know what we're after here is the problem.
I'm after the truth, and the question ends up being that you need to ask, is what I'm saying negative or is what I'm saying truthful?
What do
Yeah.
your people say when you share this with them?
Pardon me?
What do these people say when you share it with them? I'll bet you money they say pretty negative things about the city, don't they, when you share that
They're
stuff with
as
them?
equally concerned, when I talk with these people, they're as equally concerned about these type of issues as I am,
Mhm.
because we're not getting the answers. We get a
Where
lot
are
of
they?
narrative.
Where are they?
Where's what?
The people that are equally concerned about this document right here. Where are these people?
There's
that
an
are
audience,
supposedly
there's an
equally-
audience and there's a campaign underway. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can approach the microphone. Absolutely, please. Thank you.
I've worked here since April 8th.
I speak up to the,
My name's Robin Hazlett. I've worked here since April 8th. Your document implies that I'm a crook. It tells the city not to fund me, so then I won't have a job. I have a child to support. I know that doesn't impact you, but that is quite offensive. So I don't know who you are sending these documents to. I don't care. It is really offensive for you to imply that I'm a crook.
where did I imply that?
You say that I am complacent in my actions.
I'm sorry.
I am complacent in my actions, doing my job.
Where did I say you're complicit in?
Complicit.
Compli-
That's okay. Complicit. Yeah.
Complicit. Complicit.
Where did I,
It's your paper, sir. I don't know.
She's telling you how she feels. That's enough.
that's fine.
I'm sorry. It's just like continuing to listen to you say that the city employees are trying to do something. I mean, it's the sewer fund. And I'm sorry if you don't understand what Andy is explaining is how you balance a money market account. I realize the sewer isn't exactly a money market account, but it's the same concept. And that's why your numbers don't match. They're not gonna match. You said that. I don't know, I assume you have investments. You have someone, Edward Jones or something, that reconciles that for you every year. It's the same thing. And I'm just not, I thought this meeting was gonna be pleasant. The last one wasn't too bad, but wow.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, I'm standing up here so my 12-year-old knows that I'm not a crook.
Didn't suggest that you were,
Thank you. You have a good day.
you too.
Thank you, Robin.
So
Mr.
once
Sprague.
again, if I may, I'll finish up and wrap up.
Yeah,
I,
Mr.
I would really like to work going forward. I'd like the sales tax to function with the request, to not be burdened by this specter of us being manipulative and dishonest. I don't see how we can make it successful, and I don't see how the city can be successful if we don't pass the sales tax. Do you not think this is going to have an impact on the sales tax? You said it would, right in writing.
Then help me get the information that we're seeking. Help me look at this.
Then let's do it here, not in the public.
It's the public's money.
Well,
And we're a
I
public
mean, there's an influential list. I know many of the people that you know, Forrest. We've been together at Rick's place and other places. These are influential people that you're campaigning to or sharing information with.
Yeah, Mr. Sprigg, you alluded to the fact that you haven't been able to get answers. Since I've been on the city council, I interact with the city manager and through the city manager, numerous staff members and consultants on a regular basis. I'm asking questions and getting those questions answered constantly. I don't understand why you're having trouble getting questions answered or communicating with staff. That doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that.
I don't understand it as well.
You don't know how to receive the information? I don't understand it.
I know how to ask the questions. I don't receive the information. I know how to answer the questions, and I couch the questions very accurately and appropriately with some narrative that identifies why I'm seeking that particular information.
Well, I
Right.
hope you've been somewhat educated today in the presentation, because
I'm sorry.
I hope you've been somewhat educated today in the presentation regarding your letter, because it's very clear. It's very clear. I just wanted to ask you why you're having problems communicating with our staff. I don't have any problems at all communicating with our staff. I communicate with them on a regular basis, and I receive normally more than what I asked for. as far as courtesy from the staff and the professionalism. It's astounding here. But just all I needed to ask. And just to let you know, I follow the law. I believe in the law. I am not corrupt, never have been corrupt, never will be corrupt.
And
And my colleagues, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Vaughn, and Mr. Hudson, and our staff members, our city manager, Marty Brown, and our financial consultant, Andy Heath, are not corrupt either.
And
That's all I had to say. Thank you.
I have not said anybody is corrupt. I'm asking, and I'm not taking on individuals. I'm taking on actions and the lack of information that I'm not able to receive.
Thank you, Mr. Sprague. Marty, yes.
I just wanted to say that I think Councilmember Sprague, one of the things that is challenging about the way that you approach trying to understand is you ask for information and then you interpret it your own way. And you've already admitted that you don't have the background that Andy has, and you interpret it your own way, and then you write articles and editorials and letters as though they are fact when they are frequently your opinion, because you don't maybe like some things that you are actually allowed to do that are lawful and they are permitted. Most council members I've worked with in my experience, and even myself when I was one, would go to the city manager and say, I don't understand this. And they would, if they didn't have the answer, they'd set up a meeting with that department head and we'd sit down in the conference room and we would go through things until I did understand it. And that iterative back and forth discussion is critical and crucial to being an informed council that makes informed decisions. Because when you take a number and you don't have the background in fund accounting and government accounting and run off with it and make conclusions based on your own understanding of the world, you might make a mistake. And if you then start putting things in writing and making statements that sound as though they're fact when they're an opinion or a perspective that is not fully informed and that is void of context, which frankly, I frequently find many of your editorials are void of context, as well as your letters, it's troubling and problematic, because I have offered to you many times to sit down and meet with Andy. I've offered to answer any questions that you emailed me that you would like Andy to answer, and we can make that happen. Andy's offered his phone number. This isn't the first time he's publicly offered it to the council. I think you would be better informed, and it would help inform your letter writing if you actually had an iterative discussion with him about these numbers, and probably not in this particular forum. Thank you.
Fully informed decision is what I'm after. And that's why, and if you look at anything that I write, I back it up with what, not what I interpret. I write what the code says, or I write what the court decision says in there. And then I compare it to the information that I have. And if those don't line up, I pointed out that there's no reconciliation in there. I'm not identifying my opinion of stuff. I'm matching what I say and read that the law says. And if the law says thou shalt not, and I can see that somebody is, then I'm going to point that out. That's the problem. You're not giving me the information that so I can make a fully informed decision. That's the problem. It's not a matter of dialogue. It's a matter of giving me the numbers. Give me the numbers.
Well, we just had an example of the $517,000. You made an assumption about what that number was, and Andy already restated what that number consists of, and it's not the same thing that you thought in your letter. So that's just one example of grabbing a number, assuming it's something, and not fully understanding and unpacking what's actually in the number, which is important to the rest of your analysis.
I concur.
Okay.
That's why I've asked for the information.
I think the fact of the matter
I
is
think
that
we're
these really
arguing
could have
surface.
came to the council and to staff first before being passed
Disseminated.
out. Thank you. Being passed out to the public. I think that is of its own, not a good moral practice, because there are not necessarily accusations, but you pose the questions in a way and the statements in a way that whatever is being done is actually already shady. as I'm looking through it, it says, nevertheless, it appears that Ms. Brown may have violated these statutes ever since she was hired as interim city manager in July 2021 for existence and then for insistence. Then you continue on and you do cover parts of the law. It says by well-documented justification. Well, if well-documented isn't actually described by definition, then that's up for interpretation by anybody that takes it. So now you're taking on the role not only of accountant or finance consultant or forensic accountant for that matter, you're taking on the role of the attorney and so many other roles that you seem fit, that you are above and beyond anybody else that the city hires or has doing these roles without actually coming and talking to the professionals, the experts that the city hires to come up with these documents, that understand these documents, that spent years of their life getting educated in these documents. And I think that's what's off-putting for the most part in that regard.
Okay,
And so with that, yes, I would also like to request the people that this document was sent to, since it is public record, since it does have Willow City Council or a Sprague letterhead on it, that this is all public record as to who these were delivered to. The same that Councilmember Vaughn requested.
so this is document that was downloaded that Marty gave to us, propositions 26 and 27, the implementation guide. Here's what it says specifically. I didn't write this. I'm reading.
Mhm.
Okay. Substantial provisions in article of the Constitution, without giving the numbers here. Revenues derived from the fee or a charge must not exceed the funds required to provide the service to the
Mr. Sprague, we're fully aware of Proposition 218,
Okay,
Proposition
fine.
26.
And it also says no fee or charge may be imposed for general fund service.
Mr. Sprague, we're fully aware of Proposition 26 and
Okay.
Proposition 218.
All
No
right.
need to read.
So that's all I'm asking for
Documents.
is let's comply with that. And nobody has given me the evidence, of
We-
the documentation.
We have thoroughly complied with Proposition 218. Okay. Mr. Ross, yes, I'm sorry. I know you were staying there waiting so very patiently. Hello, Doug. Good to see you.
So fiscally, there are two people standing here in front of you. One is Doug Ross,
Well, hello. Doug.
reported for the Mirror. The other one is Doug Ross, citizen of Willows.
Hi, Doug.
Hi. Well, I can't really speak as a representative of the Mirror, because, I can't really speak on behalf of the Mirror because I got the Mirror to respond to. The shortest possible message is that, and I'm not pointing this at anyone, but I'm just saying that, for the past hour, as a private citizen, not a reporter, I felt, my time of day and time of year and time of life has being wasted on this subject for this reason. I may have said it before, and it's not relevant whether I did or not, I'll say it now. This is a legislative arena. If I remember my 1960s civics class, and I remember a lot of it, this is not an executive probe, or whatever the executive branch does when the Attorney General at 555 Capitol Mall comes down on you. This is not an executive arena. It's a legislative arena. So to watch prosecutorial, I can't think of a way to express it, but to bring a prosecutorial gong persistently over time into a legislative arena is inappropriate, and it should be transferred to another arena. I'd like to kind of try and condense what I'm trying to say by citing with David, Councilman Vaughn, and say that I affirm what he says. Where is this going? What's the upshot going to be? What's the envisionment going to be? Well, my contention is that because this is being introduced by Councilman Sprague as a prosecutorial javelin within the legislative arena offends me.
not only as a private citizen of Willows, but, and America, but also as a journalist. Um, I'm not sure who has the power to look into this, what kind of table would have to be come to get this going. But to me, this letter, which I didn't receive a copy of it, and sometimes I feel I have not pointing any fingers at anyone, because everyone here has been very cooperative, but there are other times in the past journalistically where you feel like you have to beg, or you have to, get down on your knees and pray and beg for publicly available information. So, in the interest of time, I'll just conclude my remarks with this, if I may, and it should just take less than a minute. When I was working as a staff member, W4 for a Central California newspaper in the 80s called the West Side Index, Bill Matos, publisher, the district attorney Al Girolami of Stanislaus County came to a city council meeting, put a giant chart on the wall of mafia figures around the country. And because there's two men in Wisconsin who were brothers, Frank and Angelo Terranova, wanted to build a cheese plant in Newman, California, where the West Side Index was based, on the west side, as they call it in Modesto. I found that as non-relevant to the arena, as I find this subject recurring to the city council arena, because this is the legislative arena, not a prosecutorial arena. I'm just gonna stop there. I think I might have made my point.
No, yeah, you did. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ross. Thank you very much. Are there any other public comments in reference to item 5 or fiscal year 24-25 budget approval? Any further public comments? Council members, any further questions, comments in reference to the matter before us concerning the budget? Hearing none. Marty, Andy, anything further? No? Pleasure of the council in reference to item 5, the fiscal year 2024-25 budget.
Some reason I cannot find the
Mayor, I move that we,
resolution, so if somebody else would make the motion, I can't find it to read it.
I move that the resolution to approve the fiscal year 2024-2025 proposed budget be approved.
Vice Mayor Hudson has moved that item 5, the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget approval and a resolution so attached be approved as presented.
Second.
And Councilmember Bodden has the second. Further discussion? Once again, thank you for all of your very hard work on this budget that you brought forward, and for all of your help and great information. Matter's been moved and seconded. No further discussion. Mr. City Clerk, you're waiting for me. As this is a resolution, this will be a roll call vote, please.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Thomas,
Yes.
Councilmember Sprague,
No.
Councilmember Bodden,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hudson,
Yes.
Mayor Hansen.
Aye. Matter carries 4-1. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hoover. Item 6, fiscal year 2024-2025 appropriations limit. Consider adoption of a resolution establishing the fiscal year 2024-25 appropriations limit for the city of Willows. And once again, Marty Brown, our city manager, and Andy Heath are our presenters. I'll begin with Marty.
Well, that last item was so exciting. I think we forgot that we had it.
You had one more item. Yes,
I-
2-item agenda.
So I can actually take this one, Mr.
Thank
Mayor.
you.
Andy, you got it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Andy Heath, the city's financial consultant. So appropriations limit needs to be established by every jurisdiction that receives a share of discretionary taxes for use of operational purposes. The GAN limit, otherwise known as the appropriation limits, actually came into play around 1979, right around the time Prop 13 was adopted, where it set a base year that said this is the amount that cities can receive in taxes, and that base year grows by an annual factor of the CPI in the state of California and the growth in population in either the county or the city that the jurisdiction is in. So that has been applied every year since then. The city of Willows appropriations limit for fiscal 24-25 is being adjusted to $14,248,000. And your proceeds of taxes in the general fund for the coming year are just over $4.3 million. So you are significantly under the limit.
We could have a
and-
3% tax.
and really have nothing
Just
to worry about.
kidding.
Again, this is just to make sure that you're not receiving more taxes than you should. Consistent with Prop 13 regulations, et cetera. To the extent the jurisdiction was receiving more taxes than it should, and those proceeds of taxes did exceed the appropriations limit, doesn't mean you need to give them back. It just means you need to earmark them for something very specific that's kind of not operational. Certain things like capital items and the such. So, but your city has nothing to worry about for a long time coming, if ever.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Heath. As we know, this is annual housekeeping is required by law. Any questions, comments for Mr. Heath in reference to the appropriations limit for 24-25? Nothing, any public comments in this matter? Very good. Pleasure of the council in reference item 6, the fiscal year 24-25 appropriations limit. There is a resolution attached.
Did you find it, Rick?
I have it right.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve the resolution of the city council of the city of Willows establishing fiscal year 2024-25 appropriation limit.
Councilmember Thomas has moved to approve item 6 and the resolution attached as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Councilmember Biden has a second. Further discussion? Mr. City Clerk, roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Thomas,
Yes.
Councilmember Sprague,
No.
Councilmember Vauden,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Hudson,
Yes.
Mayor Hansen.
Aye. Thank you, Amos. Matter carries 4-1. Moving on to item 7, adjournment. The time is 4:23 PM. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you very much for attending and meeting adjourned.